Before I give you a short introduction into the Interreg SIV project, which is the setting where we are hosting the webinar today, I want to say a few words about myself and what we have planned for today. I'm Flavia Bogorin. I'm a researcher at the Competence Center for Nonprofit Organizations and Social Entrepreneurship of the Vienna University of Economics and Business. We are one of the partners in the Interreg Social Impact Vouchers, in short SIV project, which is an Interreg Central Europe project focusing on developing new approaches for alleviating unemployment. And our focus within the project was to conduct the impact assessment of the voucher programs that we have been developing within the project. And I am going to give you today a short introduction into the topic of impact and impact measurement in general. And then we'll also present to you some results from the impact evaluation of the Social Impact Vouchers project. More specifically, we are going to focus on the results of the German program, where we conducted a more comprehensive impact analysis. You will see the main results today. And then we also have today joining Klaus Kittler, our partner from Germany, from Diakonie Württemberg, which is the implementing organization, the partner organization that implemented the voucher program that we evaluated. And today he will join us to reflect a little bit about the results of the study that we conducted and to talk about possible future steps, how we can use the results in everyday work. If you have any questions, you can raise your hand at any time, also during the presentation. If anything is not clear, you can just intervene at any time. And at the end, we will have a little bit more time for a discussion round. I want to start today's webinar with showing you a short video. It's an introduction video, which I think is a good introduction into the SIV project. So I think it will give you a good idea about what we are doing within the framework of the SIV project. So it's not that long. Enjoy, and then we will continue with the presentation.
The Social Impact Vouchers project helps to change the lives of job seekers from disadvantaged social groups, innovatively, sustainably, and on a long-term basis. The project started in 2019 and is co-financed from the Interreg Central Europe program. The project is a joint effort of 11 partners from 8 countries in this region. Non-profit organizations, municipal partners, business partners, and competence centers are testing the innovative project simultaneously and jointly. In their cooperation, they benefit from each other's country-specific innovations and special features. Each placement promotes the integration of disadvantaged people and provides companies with highly motivated employees. Moreover, voucher systems provide support to job seekers and employers also via training, coaching, or capacity building. In all project countries, there have long existed a large number of different, mostly public, support programs for the unemployed. Our ambition is not to replace them or compete with them, but rather to complement them where support is still needed. We see the possibility of addressing the most vulnerable of the vulnerables and helping them through individual approaches to obtain the best social policy tool, their own income from their own work. The sustainability of the voucher programs will be ensured through funding from the social impact funds. 4 project partners decided to set up individual funds at the national level, while 4 project partners joined forces to establish a transnational fund. This transnational cooperation is represented on the Next Access platform, where interested donors can inform themselves about the supported voucher programs and directly make financial contributions to the fund. The Social Impact Vouchers project marks merely the beginning of long-term and innovative support for job seekers from disadvantaged groups. But it's not just job seekers who benefit from the initiative. In this way, employers can first try employing vulnerable people who can be of great benefit to their business or other type of activity. And last but not least, every single success story moves our society forward. Get inspired as well.
And now that we got a quick impression of what we are doing within the framework of the Interreg SIV project, I think we can start with the topic of today's webinar. I'm going to share my screen with you again. Yes, today we are talking about impact measurement and impact assessment. More specifically, first I want to give you a quick introduction into the methods and tools for analyzing impact. So we will have a look together at what we mean by impact, how do we define this, what kind of methods and tools do we use for conducting impact assessments and impact analysis. And also I will give you a brief introduction into the specific method of SROI analysis, or social return on investment analysis, which is the method that we used for our evaluation of the German program. Which brings me to part 2, where I will present you the key findings from the SROI analysis of the German voucher program. Which we'll then, in the third part of today's webinar, discuss and reflect together with our partners from Baden-Württemberg. Yes, what is impact? So, in short, we define impact as those positive or negative changes that can be observed in beneficiaries or affected groups, as well as in the environment and the society as a whole after an intervention has taken place. So basically, an activity has to take place, an intervention, some kind of service that then produces a change in a certain state. This impacts, you can imagine they can vary also in intensity, also in duration. They can vary depending on which interest groups they address. So we usually need to work with some tools to better structure the impact and to be able to put it together into more manageable systems that we can then also use for further steps in an analysis, for instance. How we decide to do this is to first look at the temporal dimension of impact. So immediately after an intervention, we have short-term impacts that are produced as a direct result of these activities. It is often the case that they are also not that long-lasting. So they are the immediate effects of an intervention. But at the same time, we can also look at medium or long-term impact, which also gives us indication of the sustainability of certain activities. From a structural perspective, we distinguish between micro, meso, and macro levels. The micro level is the individual level, so those are impacts that affect person. So on the personal level is where we can observe them. The meso level is the level that refers to an organization or a group of persons. So it's already a more aggregated levels, but here we can also observe the impacts that, for instance, can affect processes in an organization or affect groups of persons as a whole, so not only the individual people. On the macro level, that are the impacts that are most difficult to measure and to observe, because you would have to use completely different tools for looking at this impact. But nonetheless, we do know that impacts can also occur on the societal level. For this, also the activities that result in this impact will have to be just as broad and to really have an effect and an influence on the society as a whole. Also from a content perspective, we distinguish 6 different dimensions of impact. So impact can, for once, be economic impact. Those are usually costs or investments. It's usually some kind of a result that has a financial and monetary value. Social impact is also been the focus of our studies. So you probably noticed when I was talking about the social return on investment that this is going to be a central topic today. But on the other hand, we can also identify political impacts or ecological impacts or cultural impacts or physical, psychological impacts that occur again on the individual level. These are just some structures that would help us to better distinguish between impacts, because sometimes they do overlap, and it makes it a little bit easier to analyze them in a structured way if we make use of such categories. And at the core of each impact analysis, we have the impact value chain, which you may also know as the theory of change, is a logical structure that we use to again in the end to better structure the impact. But until we get there, we actually have to also look at the resources that are used for an activity or for an intervention, what kind of activities were enabled due to these resources that were put in, so the input side. And these activities can usually also be quantified. So we will then also have some quantities that we define as output in this case. And based on the inputs, activities, and outputs that we observe, then we can also determine the impacts by using different research methods. So the impacts are usually the result of the activities, and also here we can distinguish between impacts that are a direct result of the activities that we are evaluating. So this is indeed what we define as impact. But on the other hand, there are also other effects that come into play that we cannot really relate to the activities that we evaluate. So it can be also external factors that have an influence on the results of on the outcomes that certain societal groups or certain organizations have, and that we cannot attribute to the activities that we are evaluating. So this is what we have to actually subtract from the overall impact of the activity in order to have a clean result here. This is in the graphic what we call dead weight. So the dead weight is the are the effects, the results that would have occurred anyway, also without the interventions that we are evaluating. And this is something that we want to leave out in order to have clean results in our case. So the basic logic for the impact value chain is, as I was saying, for each stakeholder, for each interest group that is somehow related to the program or the project that we are evaluating, to create theory of change, like I was explaining in the current slide. And this allows us for each stakeholder to realize what kind of resources they put into a project, what kind of activities result from these resources, how we can measure them in quantities, and in the end, which is our main goal, to see what kind of impact is produced by these activities. If we have an impact value chain, like I was describing, for each of the stakeholders that are relevant for a project or for an organization, and we put all the impact value chains together, the result is the impact model, like you can see here. And an impact model is the conceptual framework for each impact analysis. So it's set up for a project or an intervention or an entire organization, depending on what the focus of our impact analysis is. And it consists of multiple impact value chains for each stakeholder. The advantage of such an impact model is that it allows us to also aggregate the different components of the impact value chain. So if we want to know the input of a project in general, so for the entire project, then we just have to add together the inputs from all the stakeholders for which we created impact value chains. Just the same as also with the impact. If we want to add together the impacts for all the stakeholders, we can do it on the basis of the conceptual impact model that we use as a basis for our analysis. So this is another tool that we use to better structure the information and the results of our impact analysis. And for conducting an impact analysis, now that we have the conceptual framework ready, we go through several steps. First, it's something that we already accomplished in order to create a hypothetical impact model. First, we had to identify the stakeholders, so all actors or players that are somehow involved in the project or the program that we are evaluating. Then we have the hypothetical impact model, like we saw on the previous slide. And this is where we start assessing the impact of the organization or the project, actually. Because in the impact value model, in the impact model, we have first thoughts, first hypotheses of what the impact could be, but then we need to really verify if this was indeed the case. So if our conceptual framework is indeed in line with the reality of the intervention. And for this, we make use of different research models. We do interviews, we do surveys, we do focus groups with the different stakeholders involved. We also use secondary materials and all kind of data sources that are available with the purpose to identify and specify the impacts. When we identify the impacts, the next step would be to measure the impacts. Because an impact will probably refer either to just one person or to a group of persons, or, as I was saying, to the society as a whole, depending on the intervention. So when we measure the impact, we get more information on the width and on the intensity of the impacts as well. And this is important because in step 6, then we focus on assessing the impact. This is particularly important for the SRY analysis, to which I will come in a second. When conducting this step, then we don't just want to have information on the width and the intensity of the impact, but we also want to rate it. We want to say something about the meaning of the impact for the intervention as a whole. And monetization is one possibility to do this. When we decide to monetize impacts, then we use something that we call proxy indicators. Those are support mechanisms that allow us to give a monetary value to impact that is actually non-monetary. I was talking in the beginning about economic impact, so that's not the problem. If we have impact in form of costs, for instance, then it already has a monetary value. We don't need to monetize it additionally. But if we have social impact, like better health outcomes or improved knowledge and know-how level, then these impacts don't have a monetary value, and for conducting an SRI analysis, we need to attribute approximate monetary value to the impacts in order to be able to go through the next steps of the analysis, to which I will come in a moment. So this is what happens in step 6. And for step 7 of the analysis, we have the presentation and aggregation of the impacts, which will then be used for different purposes. So here at the latest, we have to ask the question, what should happen with the results? Why are we conducting the impact analysis in the first place? Do we want to find out more about the work and the outcomes, the results of the projects, and use it for reformulating our strategy and better understanding the results of our work? Or do we want to use this information for communicating it to the outside world, for communicating it to possible funders or donors, or communicate it to the interested research community, for instance? So it can be various purposes that we fulfill when we conduct an impact analysis. And this is going to be the focus of today's discussion about how we concretely use the results of the impact analysis that we conducted in our project. As I was saying, the purposes can vary. External communication was one of the examples that I was naming, but at the same time, it can also be for strategic cooperation or scaling of impact. So one of the possibilities to use the results of an impact analysis is to use the results to better understand how the activity works, and to be able on this basis to scale up the model also to other areas. At the same time, it can also be used for internal development within the organization, to improve the strategy process and to optimize different activities and processes internally. Fundraising, finding investors can also be a goal. So the purpose, the resources, and the possibilities of the analysis that we are conducting are actually what define the scope and the intensity of the analysis as well. And now I get to the concept that we used for our evaluation. The social return on investment analysis is a special form of impact analysis. So if you think back to the steps of conducting an impact analysis, it's not that much different what we do for a social return on investment analysis. You probably noticed that the conceptual framework of the SRI analysis is quite similar to what we saw when we were looking at the impact value chain and at the impact model. So again, we have it structured by stakeholder. We have stakeholder A, stakeholder B. So all the different stakeholder groups involved in a project or an intervention. And for each stakeholder, we determine the performance, so what kind of activities and outputs are conducted by the stakeholders. That would then result in outcomes. And when we are subtracting the dead weights, so the effects that are due to other factors that are not attributed to the intervention that we are evaluating, then we have the impact. So it's the logic of the impact value chain also here in the background. And what we do for the social return on investment analysis additionally is to then monetize the impact. So also non-monetary impact to attribute monetary values that are approximately close to portraying the value of the impact. Also based on, yes, the support mechanisms. This is what we do in the last step of the impact analysis, of the SRI analysis. And we are doing this because we want in the end to have all impacts where it is possible to do this. We want to have them as either monetary or monetized impact in order to be able to add them together. This is what you see in this last column here on the graphic. We have the monetized impact of stakeholder A and stakeholder B and so on. And we add everything together to the sum of impacts in monetary terms for all stakeholders. And why do we do this? Because for the SRI analysis, we want to compare the sum of impacts to the sum of investments that were necessary to make the program or the project possible in the first place. And when comparing the sum of impacts to the sum of investment, then we get a ratio. It's what we call the SRY value, so the social return on investment value of a project, where we know the relation between investment and monetized impact. And in the case of a successful project, a successful and impactful intervention, of course, the sum of impacts would be higher than the initial investment into the project. So it's actually a very aggregated performance indicator, the SRY value, that shows the dimensions of how the monetized impact refers to the initial investments. And to make it more easier to also communicate externally, or to make it easier to illustrate, then we express the SRI value as the amount of monetary impact in euros that results from €1 invested in the intervention. So an SRI value of 3, for example, means that the monetized impact of the intervention is 3 times as high as the initial investment. And we will soon have a look at the results of the SRI analysis of the German model, so you can have a concrete example of how we approached the SRI analysis in that case. Impact measurement, I think it has its merits, and it can be used for different purposes in different contexts, and it can give good insights into into the results and the outcomes of an intervention or a project. But on the other hand, we are also aware of the fact that it also has its limitations and its shortcomings, and there are some critique points, especially regarding the SRI analysis that I will address in a moment. But first, I want to focus on what we see as the main strengths of the SRI analysis and of impact measurement in general. The main point is that it gives us the possibility to move away from a solely input-output oriented perspective. So input-output comparison is the basis of every efficiency assessment, so every performance assessment that only looks at investments and the quantities that resulted from this investment. And we, with the impact analysis, we go a step further and look beyond the quantities to also see what kind of benefits or the impact that resulted for the different stakeholder groups. So it's an add-on this more narrow perspective of input-output efficiency assessments. And it's also a very broad form of impact of assessment, because we have the stakeholder perspective. We don't just look at one specific group or at a small part of a project. Instead, we have a look at all the stakeholders that are somehow affected or somehow involved in the project that we are evaluating. And for these stakeholders, we look at both positive and negative effects that the intervention has on them. So another way to show the variety of impact and how broad the impact can be. And as I was saying, one of the purposes of impact analysis can be to better understand, for organizations to better understand their own work and the impact of their own work. Most of, especially nonprofit organizations, have certain mission goals, certain impact goals that are defined per mission in their initial mission. And such an assessment can give them the possibility to really verify if they are fulfilling their mission in a good way. And to also not only understand what their work means for their direct beneficiaries and for the organization as a whole, but also to understand what kind of indirect impact could result from their work that also affect other stakeholders that were maybe not so much in the direct perception of the organizations. And it can also provide legitimacy, of course. So organizations can use the results of impact assessment to really show and communicate to the world that they are doing a good job, they are doing a very impactful job, and they are fulfilling their goals. And also it provides a certain basis for arguing and negotiating with possible investors or with possible donors. So it's a fact-based way of approaching investors as well. And it can open also room for innovation by noticing maybe some aspects of an organization's work that were not so visible before conducting the impact analysis. It's also possible to build on that and to come to more innovative approaches through this method. On the other hand, as I was mentioning, impact measurement also has its limitations. And the main problem is that it's not always easy to determine causality. So to really demonstrate a consistent logical link between services and effects. So if we know that certain activities are conducted within the framework of a project, we cannot always assure that the impacts that we are observing are the direct result of these activities. Is what I was talking about when I was explaining the concept of dead weight. So that's the problem. There are always external factors that play a role in certain processes, and it's not always easy to exclude them from the analysis. So this is some it's a point where we try our best to be consistent and to be very strict and to really see that the results are valid, but it's always a source of possible problems or errors. On the other hand, another problem is to really define the scope of the impact analysis in a good way. That's not always as easy as it should be or as it sounds, because if you think back when I was talking about the different types of impacts that we can observe, then there are sometimes also overlapping aspects. So it's not always easy to distinguish between short-term impact and medium-term impact. When does one end and the other one starts? So the different levels of impact can also be difficult to differentiate and to really structure in a good way. This is why we really need the different tools that we have developed to structure impact in a good way, in order to avoid repetition or overlapping or different problems that could lead to unclear results. And another problem is, of course, the indicators. So especially when we talk about monetization or quantification, it's not a standardized process. And of course, the results will vary depending on the indicators that we are using. And we do the best to stay consistent and to, where possible, use the same indicators throughout all our impact analysis, but it's still a point that is not standardized and is therefore subject to maybe also critique. Difficulty of subjectivity. It's also connected to the previous point that I was mentioning. So if it's not a standardized process, it means that a certain degree of subjectivity cannot be avoided. So also when we are using different indicators, when we are choosing the indicators, it's a decision that influences the results of the activities in the end. Also, if there are not always data available for certain calculations or analysis, then we will have to also sometimes work with assumptions that is again something subjective. So the best that we can do to avoid any unclean results in this sense is to be aware of these limitations of the impact analysis and to try to work out standards for ourselves as best as we can, and to this way achieve more standardized results in the end. So this was the introduction into the topic of impact and conducting impact analysis, because I think it's an important background information in order to be able to understand the results of the SRI analysis that I'm going to present as an example in the following section of our webinar. We also have a complete study report where the complete results of the analysis are described into detail. If you want to have a look at it, you can access this via the link or by scanning the QR code here. With the SRI analysis of the German voucher program, we aimed to identify broad impacts of the program. So that means also short-term, also medium and long-term social impacts, economic impacts of the program employment vouchers that was implemented by our German partners in Württemberg. And because we chose to use the method of a social return on investment, another aim of the study was to also show the monetary value of the effects and impacts and to compare them to the investments made into the project. And how did we do this exactly? We took the year 2019 as the framework of the study, and we included in our analysis all activities that were conducted within the social impact voucher program in the year 2019. That means all the activities referring to the participants or to the employer providers that were part of the program. The voucher program of the Diaconie is an intervention that addresses unemployed people, sometimes people that have been unemployed for quite a while, so long-term unemployed, or other vulnerable groups on the labor market. And at the same time, they also work together with employment providers. So these are, in this specific case, either the church congregations or employment companies of the Diakonisches Werk that provide jobs for the unemployed people that we are trying to place into the labor market. And in the year 2019, we had 126 program participants, so unemployed people that then received different types of employment within the voucher program. So also mini jobs, also normal jobs subject to social insurance contributions, and also more like volunteering activities that also got some remuneration, but only on a very low level. And this 126 participants were placed with 24 employment providers, so either employment companies or church congregations. And how did we conduct the analysis? We, of course, had to collect data. We did qualitative interviews with the different stakeholders, so with the unemployed people, with the representatives of the employment providers, also with representatives of public institutions that work with the unemployed people on a regular basis. And we also did some quantitative surveys where we collected financial data for the input side of the analysis. We collected information on the activities that are provided within the project, and we collected information on the impacts. This is these are the main primary data sources that we used. And in addition, we also worked with secondary materials, with secondary data from statistics, in order to have analysis results as precise as possible. These are the stakeholders that we included in the analysis. So when we looked at the social impact voucher program as a whole, then we could determine that the main stakeholder group and also the main beneficiaries of the project are the program participants, so the unemployed people, job seekers. But the program doesn't only influence the job seekers, it also influences their personal and family environment. So if the long-term unemployed got a job as a result of the voucher program, then it would also lead to improvement of the family situation in some cases. Other stakeholders are the employer side. Again, the employment companies and church congregations. They also have their own impact, like image improvement through participating in social projects, or network expansion by working together with other employment providers within the scope of the project. Also, the work colleagues of the job seekers, so the key employers of the employment providers, have derived impact from the employment program. So it's often that they develop a better understanding about the needs of the disadvantaged groups on the labor market by having this direct exchange and by working closely together with them. It's also the social welfare service Württemberg that derives impact from the intervention. So we are the implementing partner that was conducting the impact, but at the same time, the employees of the social welfare service develop a better understanding of the needs of the participants and have a positive feeling that they are supporting this disadvantaged group to improve their work chances. Also, public institutions like employment agencies or job centers have impact, because if the unemployed get a job as a result of the program, then it eases their workload and it leads to savings on basic security benefits, for instance. Social insurance institutions and the state, they have mainly financial impact. So as a result of jobs created, there are also additional social insurance contributions and additional taxes that are being paid. So as you can see, there is a large variety of stakeholders that derive various impact from the project. So it's not only about the job seekers themselves, but about other stakeholder groups as well. And here you see an excerpt of the impact model that we created for the voucher program. For each of the stakeholders that I was mentioning before, we developed an impact value chain. So the main beneficiaries are the job seekers. Here we see that the job seekers didn't have a financial contribution, so they didn't have to pay to get into the project, but nonetheless they had non-financial input like time resources. They brought in their skills and the willingness to be helped. Activities of the voucher program that were provided for the job seekers are placements, employment, support of the job seekers within the program. And the outputs are the quantities behind these activities, so the number of participants that were placed or employed or supported. And this inputs, activities and outputs allowed for the effects or the impacts of the voucher program. These are only a few examples. If you have a look at the complete study, is a much longer list of impacts that we were able to identify. But for instance, the job seekers felt a sense of purpose and the opportunity to make a contribution to the society by means of the employment that they received during the program. It also helped them to create a routine and a structure in everyday life. So to have a job to that you have to get to, that you have to get up in the morning for. It was something that had a positive influence on the daily routine of some participants. They acquired new competences, also soft skills, but also professional competences. But you can also see there are some negative influences, so some negative impact of the intervention. So those are compared to the positive impacts, a lot less, of course. It's all unintended impact, but nonetheless, we still include them in the analysis. So for some job seekers, when they were employed, it was a little bit overwhelming in the beginning. It was quite stressful to take on new responsibility and to yes, to have to be engaged at the workplace. Another example is the impact value chain for the employment companies and church congregations. They also bring their input into the employment program. In their case, it's also financial input, so financial resources, and also the time and personnel of the key employers, so the employees of the employment providers that are responsible for guiding and supporting the job seekers in their employment. Activities are workplace promotion support with recruitment activities and mediation. So within the framework of the voucher program, the employment companies also receive services in terms of support with recruiting activities or mediation. The output is again the number of participants that were placed, employed, and supported, and some of the impacts that we identified for the employment providers are savings in terms of recruitment costs and time facilitation, for instance, because they receive support in terms of recruitment activities. As I was saying, also an improved image and recognition because they are involved in employment of disadvantaged target groups was also an impact, and they have the possibility to establish or to further expand their networks and cooperations with other partners. And here are also two examples of how we assess the impact. So being an SRI analysis, we also monetize the social impact. In this case, for program participants, where we could observe that the voucher program had a positive effect on their daily routine and everyday life structure. We used as a proxy indicator to approximately show the monetary value of this social impact, the average cost of project management or time management seminar. It's, of course, a different kind of activity that's compared to what activities were provided in within the framework of the voucher program, but a project management or time management seminar has the same goal to bring in some kind of structure, some kind of routine, and this is why it is a fitting comparison to show the monetary impact of this of the voucher program as well. For the employment providers, I selected here an example for the impact improved image or recognition for employment of the target group, which we monetized via the proxy indicator cost of an online advertising campaign. Here it's the same logic. It's a different kind of activity that we find on the market and that has a monetary value, and that has a similar goal to yes, promote the client or to to improve the image of the client. And this is also why we chose to transfer this monetary value in order to monetize the social impact that we were able to observe for the voucher program. Those are just two examples, but we went through this process for all the impacts that we could identify for all stakeholder groups. And when we put everything together and we aggregate the investments on the one side and the impacts on the other side, then we get the following results. The SRI value, which is the highly aggregated key performance indicator of our impact analysis, shows that for investments, which in sum summed up to 937,000 euros, we could identify and monetize impacts in sum of 4.3 million euros. And if we put this into relations with the investment and the monetized impact, then we get an SRI value of 1 to 4.62, which means that for each €1 that was invested in the program, we could observe and identify monetized impact of 4.62 euros. So it's more than 4 times as much monetized impact as investments in the project. So quite a high value and a clear indication that the program is indeed impactful and successful. But if you think back, we are aware that that the results of the SRI analysis are somehow subjective, which is also why we choose to calculate different scenarios and to show the different sides of an impact analysis by putting more emphasis on some aspects and in other scenarios on other aspects. The SRE value that you see here, 124.6, it refers to the year 2019. But on the other hand, it is clear that the jobs created that maybe well, that in some cases go beyond the year 2019 as well, and they are still positive results for the participants also in the following years, that would indicate that also the impacts that are related to these jobs would not cease to exist at the end of 2019, which is why we decided to also calculate the medium-term and long-term scenario, where we extrapolated the impact that we identified for the year 2019 to a longer period of time. For the medium-term scenario, we made the assumption that the impact would continue to exist for 5 years after the voucher program ended. For the long-term scenario, we extrapolated it over a period of 10 years, for instance. For those job seekers that would indeed keep the job for a longer period of time. And this shows that it does make a difference, and if the impact doesn't cease to exist after the intervention ends, or after, yes, the impact analysis was completed, then we can see that the monetized impact would be even higher. So it's 1 to 6.1 in the medium-term scenario, or 1 to 8.38 in the long-term scenario. So all in all, a very impactful and successful intervention that creates much impact for all the stakeholder groups. So you can see in the table here, it's the program participants, or the job seekers, that have the largest share of profits, so of impact. It's 77.8% of the total monetized impact that we attributed to the program participants. But on the other hand, also the social insurance institutions and the employment agency have considerable impact. So respectively around 6% of the total profits. And also the other stakeholders have not so large shares of impact, but nonetheless considerable impact. Yes, so to sum up, an SRI value of 4.62 proves that the voucher program is particularly effective. This consists only of the short-term impact. If it extrapolates to also look at the medium and long-term impacts, then the SRI value is higher, so it's around 6 or 8 respectively. The program participants, it's not surprising, are the main beneficiaries of the voucher program, but nonetheless also other stakeholders have significant shares of impact as well. And now I would like to hear your thoughts on the results that we just presented. Do you have any questions or any comments before we move on to the discussion and see how we can reflect on the results from the perspective of the project partners? Well, if there are no immediate questions to the presentation, then I would suggest to move on to the discussion part. And here I'm happy to welcome to the discussion also Klaus Kittler, our German project from Diakonie Württemberg. Klaus Kittler is the representative of Diakonie Württemberg and one of the projects in the Interreg SIV consortium, is an expert in labor market integration and was involved in the SROI analysis in an advisory and supporting role. So his main involvement was to help us put together and collect all the data and the information that we needed for the analysis, but also to help us to validate our hypotheses and our assumptions that were key for conducting a good SRI analysis. And I think that in this role, Klaus also got an insight into the workings of how comprehensive impact analysis can be conducted, but at the same time, he also helped us in our work with his very good working knowledge of the labor market environment as a whole. So I think it was a reaching learning experience on both parts. This is why we come together today and want to discuss and reflect on our work together a little bit in this last part of the webinars. Klaus, maybe for starters, you could tell us a little bit about what are your main thoughts in regards to the impact analysis. So just explain to us a little bit about whether you use the results of the analysis in any way during your or for your work at the Diakonie. And if so, then how did you make use of these results best until now?
Well, hello to everybody, and thank you for inviting me. Well, the results for us were very positive. Oh, sorry, I have an echo in my audio. You too?
I am actually hearing you well, but I can try to mute my microphone. Maybe it helps.
Okay, I try on. Well, for us, the results of the SROE were very positive, and we almost knew the classical evaluations of labor market measurements, and therefore it was a supplement. It was a new view of social costs, because in former times often social costs were regarded as lost money and not as investments. And so it helps us to call for new investments in the social politics and in labor market measures. And we hope that it is helping a new basis to argue for those measurements.
Yes, thank you for this first insight. So to sum it up, it's a new approach that also highlights other aspects that especially social aspects that in other types of assessments would maybe not come to light that clearly. Can you maybe also give us some examples of how other stakeholders or other partners that got to see the results, when we presented the results, reacted to them? So what do you think is the general standing of other partners when it comes to making use of the results of impact analysis? Mm-hmm. So is it yes, is there a skeptical approach? Is it, on the contrary, something that is resonates quite positively with your partners? So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this.
Well, we presented it and we discussed it with several partners, especially with some partners from the Bundestag. These are German politicians who are engaged in labor market politics. And we discussed it also with the managing director from the German employment services as well. And their first reactions were extremely positive, but also skeptical. Positive, as I said, is that it's a new view that we can monetize qualitative aspects of impacts, because in former times you only could describe these impacts, and now we can monetize them, and we can therefore tell the politicians that these are economic effects, and this is a help for us. At the other time, they are skeptical because we have a contradictive inside the SROE evaluation, because we try to identify all stakeholders and we try to identify all the impacts, and this is very bright in the describing, and afterwards, after monetizing these effects, we only have one value, and to aggregate these complex impacts to one value, it's rather hard to describe afterwards how it's reached that we have such a good impact and such a good result from this measure. And this makes the politicians often a little skeptical, but mostly they look very positively on this.
Mm. Yes, that's always a challenge to find a good middle ground. So how much complexity do you want to reduce, but still to not lose too much information and too much content? So it's difficult to find a good solution here. But this is why we always plead for not only looking at this SRI value. This could be yes, a quick indicator that the program is successful or not. But if you really want to understand everything that happens in the background, then you would have to dive into the results more and to really have a look at the individual impacts and at the individual stakeholders. But this was also our experience. This is the main point of critique, that it oversimplifies very, very complex processes and impacts that are that we do look at, but then we try to aggregate and to present in a more manageable way. But maybe to have a look at the future also. What do you think that that you and also other labor market institutions or organizations involved in employment activities could use additionally as arguments or as bargaining power for improving your standing also in the policy area and also on the labor market? What do you think would be additional aspects that could be useful for you and your colleagues to improve in the future labor market intervention and labor market instruments in general?
As you said, it's the SROE value is not the only yardstick. It's a supplement argument for us, and we can demonstrate that our activities, our social activities, not only are ethical good works, they also are economical good works. And this is, I think, the best argument, because if we try to promote our labor market activities, we not only have to überzeugen,
to convince.
Thank you. To convince the politicians who are engaged in labor market politics, but we have to convince the budget politicians, and this is really hard work, and therefore these economical arguments are very well, and we try to work so, to do so just at the moment, because at the moment in Baden-Württemberg there is discussed the budget, the state budget for the years 2023 and 2024, and therefore I think these arguments are helping us very well.
Thank you, Klaus, for this interesting insights into your work and also into the labor market environment and policy environment in Württemberg. Maybe now I can ask again the participants, are there any questions, any comments on the presentation or on the discussion that we have up to this point? Primož, you want to add something?
Yes, I'll try to be very short, because probably we're coming to the end. But thank you for, I would say, great presentation. I think it was very clear what the impact measurement actually brings and what are the advantages of doing that. Related to that, what I would like to emphasize in a way is obviously the last decade, I would say, from the European Union perspective, was oriented towards better measurement. And it seems to be extremely important. But on the other side, there are clear signs that only with a measurement and with a focus, so much focus on the measurement, we can't really solve the challenges per se. It's not really a tool that would actually directly contribute to the solution of the complex society challenges. I think it's important, but it also has to be seen in a wider perspective of what I even call, or some people call, impact management, in a sense of more coherent strategic approach. What do we want to achieve with our, whether these are services or products or activities and so on and so forth. Because by the end of the day, with all the examples from the last years, for example, what you now explained about the policymaking processes in Germany, it's always kind of a challenging to convince stakeholders or decision makers only based on the measurement. It not necessarily works like that. It has to be more coherent approach in, I think, the major challenge for the society, and to tackle the society challenges is not so much in a very precise measurement of the impact, but rather in maximizing the impact that we all want to achieve. And I think this is the major difference, I would say, because in one process we talk about more, I would say, technical tools to measure things. And on the other side, we talk about more, I would say, kind of innovative approaches of what, for example, we call impact design, in a sense of methodological approach, how to maximize our impact. We even use terminology when we call it high impact, in a sense of impact having a relevant, significant impact on the society challenges that we tackle. So I think the measurement has to be seen within the whole process, and with that, I think it's going to be easier to measure and easier to convince also others that it's important, because if it's just a separate activity from all other things, then we might have a huge challenge to introduce it both to the social economy sector, where obviously there was intention from the financiers and investors to have a very measurable actions and interventions, but also to the other sectors, to the public sector and to the business sector, where obviously if we introduce the impact management or even impact design as kind of a tool and a process to end with, well, both society benefits, but also with more innovative and a more productive products and services on the market, I think that would be a win-win situation. I left you in the chat a link to what we do to the process that we call impact design, that was supported by the Google with the donation. It might be of interest for some of them, and you will clearly see that the impact measurement or verification of the results is a part of the, I would say, larger processes. But thanks for this brilliant presentation.
Thank you also very much for this very important contribution. So I think you are fully correct. So impact measurement is not and should not be a goal on its own. It's a means to an end. As you were saying, it's a tool that we are using to better understand our impact and to better illustrate our impact. But this poses the question, of course, what happens afterwards. So we are, yes, maybe more informed now. We know more about what we are doing well, and maybe we also notice some things that aren't working so well through the impact analysis. But these are all just tools that we should then use to maximize our impact, as you were saying. And it's what I was touching upon a little bit at the beginning of my presentations, that you could use the results of an impact analysis for very different purposes. And one of it is also impact-based controlling and impact-based management, as you were saying. And this helps to further develop the strategy and the processes within an organization based on impact indicators and not so much based on input and output, so efficiency-based indicators. And I completely agree with you. It's all part of a larger context, and it should be like this. So we are not conducting impact analysis just for the sake of conducting them. It should really help in the further work of the organizations and the projects, and it should lead to maximization of impact and to improvement of strategic pursuits and so on. So thank you for this very, very interesting and important addition. Are there any more comments or questions?
Maybe one more. Yep, if I can. I just heard my echo again. So I think it's a wonderful achievement of our social impact vouchers program that we could implement the whole SRI analysis process, as of course we can hear a lot about the importance of impact measurement, and we can learn or hear a lot about different impact measurement tools and methodologies, but hardly could see any in a practice, especially such a complex approach like SRI analysis is. So I think it was a great pilot, and its results verified its importance in the management of such programs, which we are expecting that will impact the society, the labor market, or the economy. In this regard, we are almost at the end of the project, but I wanted just to ask, as it's a really complex method and approach, so what kind of workload it required from your side, I mean, from the evaluator or the stakeholder clause, how it burdened your daily routine, your operation. If you can answer this in a few words, that's absolutely enough. So thank you very much. And meanwhile, I will post the evaluation link in the chat. So please, if you can click on that and send the evaluation of the webinar to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamás, and also thank you for sharing the link. So it's just a very short feedback survey. It would take 2 to 3 minutes, not more. And we would be very happy to hear your thoughts on today's webinar. And to get back to your question, Tamás, it depends. So depending on how much you want to go into detail and how deep of a look you want to take on the whole context of the activity or project that you are evaluating, it's also different intensity for the evaluator. So there are also approaches like SRI Light, where maybe it's enough to just work with secondary materials or to talk to 2-3 key actors that have a good overview of the project. And it could also be a start for finding out more about the impact. But on the other hand, this is not the approach that we chose. We did a more comprehensive impact analysis where we used different methods, combined mixed methods, qualitative and quantitative and secondary data. So we try to make use of all the available information and data that we could get. And this is more time intensive and more time consuming. I would not be able to estimate it into work hours now, but we have been working on the study for, I think, almost a year. So that was the complete duration with, yes, on and off, of course. It's not, it wasn't the only study that we were conducting at the time, but it does take time. So to do a comprehensive analysis, it requires a longer period of time and a combination of several several methods and several evaluation activities. Okay, so if there are no more questions or comments from the participants, then I would like to conclude today's webinar. Thank you for your attention and for your participation. It was very nice to have you all attending today. And please don't forget to tell us your thoughts on today's webinar to fill out the short feedback survey. Thank you, and hopefully we will see you again at our next webinar on the Social Impact Fund topic on Thursday.
Thanks. Thank you, and goodbye.
Thank you. Have a nice
Thank you very
afternoon,
much,
everyone.
Flavia, Klaus, for your valuable and comprehensive webinar, the presentation, the discussion. So it was really valuable and informative and beneficial. So thank you very much again, and see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.